Coming up on Just Us Gals, how much do you know about your period? Turns out we'd flunked the test. We dive into the method that could unlock answers if you're struggling to conceive, why cycle charting goes beyond a period app, and cervical mucus is our superpower. Let's learn why.
I'm Heather.
I'm Jess, and this is Just Us Gals.
Mommy.
Welcome to another episode of Just Us Gals, and we have a new gal in the house. Welcome, Crisia. You are the owner of Cycle and Flow. You are a fertility specialist, and we are so excited to dive deep into all what you have to offer for us. So, Crisia, just welcome, and tell us a little bit about what Cycle and Flow is all about.
Thank you, Jess. So Cycle and Flow is a fertility support business. I do two main things. I specialize in menstrual cycle education, and I support people in charting their cycles as well, for all sorts of reasons, for trying to conceive, for avoiding pregnancy, for just health in general, and just understanding their bodies. But I also am a fertility doula, so I support people that are trying to conceive specifically with both emotional and informational support. Really leaning into the science of cycle charting and menstrual cycle education, since that's my passion.
That's really cool. And yeah. I have so many, I know Heather and I both have so many questions, but first, let's let our listeners get to know you a little bit. Actually, Crisia and I are both, our oldest kids go to the same school. They're in the same class, so that's how we know each other. And so you have two young boys. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and maybe if you have a win or a loss this week.
Sure. So I have two little boys. One's 5.5 and one just turned 3 yesterday. And I'm a biologist by training, so I have a day job. That's not my fertility support business. I work for a biodiversity monitoring institute. So the thing that my team does specifically is support Indigenous communities in developing their own environmental monitoring programs. So definitely different than fertility, but still that science background. And really the reason that I got into this was because I had that science mind, and I started doing all sorts of research on my own cycle and body when I came off birth control. So so that's a little bit about what I do. My boys take up a lot of my time, as you can imagine.
I'm shocked to hear that.
Parenting, loss or win. I was trying to think about this. I think I have a win this week.
We love Amazing. A win.
So with my oldest son, when he turned 3, I remember feeling this like intense pressure to have this fancy birthday party. And he was my first, and I had seen all these other moms put on birthday parties. So I did that, and I remember him feeling like pretty overwhelmed during that party, to the point where the following year when he turned 4, he actually asked specifically to not have a birthday party. So this year, for my son Rowan, I asked him what he wanted to do. And he said that he just wanted to hang out with his brother and one of the neighboring boys. And I rolled with it. I tried to take away that pressure on myself, even though I wanted to throw him a birthday party. I got him one of the like small bouncy castles as a surprise, and the three of them just had so much fun together, and it really didn't feel like it was overwhelming this time. So anyway, I felt like that was a win, taking away that pressure and actually just listening to what they wanted.
Totally. Yeah. I love that, because I feel like everything now is like, that Pinterest mom, and where people go all out and they do all this stuff for their kids, and it's good. It's like smart to take a step back sometimes and be like, does my kid want that? I think we talked about that in the last episode. Like, is your kid worried about this, or are you worried about this? It's kind of that exact idea there. Is this for me, or is it for my kid? And you don't even want to do that. So
or is it for other people? I
probably will remember that birthday.
Yeah.
True. Very true. Good for you, Crisia. That's awesome. And I need that reminder constantly, because I I look at beautiful things on Pinterest. I'm like, I can recreate that. Like that's just me. I'm like crafty and I'm like, ooh, a DIY. Ooh, a little bit of a challenge. Let's sign that up. But right, maybe the kid doesn't want that. So you listen to your kids and you did it right. And he had a birthday he'll remember. I have no doubt. That's awesome. Good for you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm feeling good about it. I was a little bit like apprehensive, but I'm feeling good now.
Yep, perfect. Heather, how are you doing this week?
Oh, it was a busy week. My husband was out of town for most of it. But I had a win, and it's just Penny finished kindergarten. That was a really big win, and I was a little emotional because she's going to a different school next year. And so, instead of moving up with everyone she met, it was kind of like a chapter closing, and I have a hard time with that stuff. So they brings out a book to read to them, and I was like, oh, you trying to kill me here? And I just was like, thank God I have sunglasses on, because I was crying. But it was really cute and such a special moment for her, and I'm so proud of her. So that was my win.
Crisia, our kids, they did like a little graduation day in class for the last 45 minutes of their second last class. And I don't know if you were choking up a little bit, but I was definitely holding back tears. Like,
yeah, I was.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I had this like, I couldn't decide whether it was like really, really cute or kind of funny that they were doing this graduation for kindergarten. Yes. But I definitely got emotional over it when they were like calling all the kids up.
And they were like giving them their certificates, and then they'd shake the teacher's hand, and then they'd shake the principal's hand, and it was, it's a big moment for our kids. They're going into grade 1 next year. It's
actually,
step,
Nico didn't understand what summer vacation was, and he actually was convinced that he was starting grade 1 the next day.
Oh.
So that was a surprise to him. Yeah.
Yeah, you have 2 months of amazing times ahead.
Yeah.
I think I have a win this week too. Ladies, look at us. My girls have been playing pretty well together. Yeah.
That is the win.
Of course, today Emmy had it out for her little sister. Don't know why. Just she's been busy, maybe just a little tired. But yeah, overall, they've been playing really well together and playing all sorts of imaginary games. Yay. And their favorite game to play is family.
Oh,
and
so cute.
Parker's always the baby, and Emmy's the mom. And
that is really cute.
It's so awesome to watch. So yeah, ladies, we're winning this week, and I love to hear it. Okay, Crisia, so let's talk a little bit about your business and tracking and all that. Where do you want to start with, Crisia? Why don't you start this off for us?
Well, I was thinking that it might make sense to go through what the menstrual cycle is, like hormonally. I do find that a lot of times when people come to me, we have to back up because not everyone's on the same page. As people haven't heard about this stuff since high school. Sometimes they've never heard about it. Even in high school, the education wasn't 100% all the way there. So yeah, I thought maybe I'd start with like what actually happens in your cycle. I'm going to talk about a regular cycle. There are all sorts of variations to this that can happen. So if anybody has questions, I'm not sure exactly what all of the questions are that you're going to ask, but if some questions come in that differ from what I'm about to say, it's just because this is like the standard average regular cycle, but it can look very different. So in a regular cycle, what happens is that at the beginning of your period, day 1 is the first day of flow. So if you had spotting, that would stay in the previous cycle. So the first day of your cycle is when you feel like you need to use some sort of period product, even if it's a light flow, some sort of flow. What happens is that a hormone called follicle stimulating hormone that comes from your brain starts communicating with your ovaries and starts bringing up to the surface and developing a new cohort of follicles. Follicles are what hold eggs. So a cohort of follicles comes to the surface of the ovaries because of this follicle stimulating hormone. And at some point, a dominant follicle is selected, and then all the other ones die off. When that dominant follicle starts growing, it starts producing estrogen. So that means that estrogen comes from the ovaries. So the brain and ovaries are always communicating through the menstrual cycle. When estrogen gets really, really high, it triggers something called luteinizing hormone, or LH, and that comes from the brain. So again, we're going back and forth from the ovaries and the brain. And LH is the hormone that is tested if you've ever used an ovulation strip test from the drugstore, or Amazon has them. That's what's tested. So LH surges. It kind of goes up and down really quickly, although there are a few variations of that too. And LH, or luteinizing hormone, quite literally luteinizes that dominant follicle. And that means that this is the process of turning that follicle into something called the corpus luteum, which is a temporary gland that stays in your ovaries just for the remainder of that cycle. And that gland starts producing progesterone. So progesterone only comes in the second half of the menstrual cycle. And during the process of luteinization, that dominant follicle releases an egg, and that's called ovulation. Oh. So in the beginning, in the follicular phase, which is that first part of the cycle, called the follicular phase because those follicles are developing, in the beginning, estrogen is really high because that dominant follicle is producing estrogen. In the second half of the cycle, which is called the luteal phase because of that corpus luteum, progesterone is now dominating because progesterone comes from that corpus luteum, temporary gland. So you actually have this temporary hormone-producing gland in your ovaries for half of the cycle, every single cycle. And then it dies off toward the end.
Wow, I had no idea.
It's pretty cool. It's a really cool process. That corpus luteum also produces some estrogen, so there is actually a secondary estrogen peak in the luteal phase. So your luteal phase is really rich in hormones, progesterone and estrogen. So both of those come from the ovaries. But progesterone is at a much higher rate than estrogen at that point. And progesterone is like a calming hormone. So estrogen is a hormone that gets you more energy, you want to be more outgoing, whereas progesterone in the luteal phase calms you down, and you kind of feel like you want to be more at home and not around other people, really internally focused. This is obviously a generalization, and it's not always going to be exactly like that, but in general, on average, that's what the phases might feel like.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
When people say I'm PMSing, that stereotypical thing, what phase is that? Is that the luteal phase?
Yeah, that's a great question. So PMS is premenstrual syndrome. So that would be at the end of the luteal phase before your next cycle starts, before the menstrual cycle starts. And generally...
before you start bleeding.
Before you start bleeding, where a new cycle starts, right?
So your body's gearing up and you're just feeling like take someone's head off.
So interestingly, a lot of people think that progesterone is at fault, high progesterone is at fault for PMS, but it's actually because you either have too low progesterone or progesterone is dropping too fast at the end of the cycle. So the reason that you get your period is because that corpus luteum will degrade over time. So it has a lifespan, and for any given person, it can be anywhere from about 11 to 16 days, and it will stay consistent for an individual person. So that luteal phase is always actually about the same length, whereas the follicular phase can change a lot, which is another story.
So what you're telling me is if somebody wants to conceive, it's very beneficial to work with somebody like you, because it sounds like there's a lot going on and it's so unique.
Yes, it can. Your cycle can be very unique to you. And ovulation, there are all sorts of things that can happen with ovulation. It can be delayed, it can come early. That timing is not set in stone. Okay, so with the luteal phase, let's say you have a 14-day luteal phase. At around day 11, 12, progesterone will start decreasing because that corpus luteum starts degrading. So because progesterone gives the uterine lining a structural support, say, once it drops, it takes away that structural support and your uterine lining comes out, which is what your period is. So it's really that drop in progesterone that triggers your period. Now, if you were to get pregnant, HCG, the pregnancy hormone, talks back to the ovary and tells that corpus luteum to not degrade and to continue high progesterone, which is why you don't get your period if you get pregnant.
Okay. Yeah. And the ovulation period, is what, about 2 weeks after your menstrual cycle's done, like the bleeding stops? Am I remembering this right?
Yeah. I mean, you are remembering what you probably learned, but it's more complicated than that.
Oh yeah, of course it is.
So yeah, the average medical textbook cycle is 28 days, and you ovulate on day 14, which is 2 weeks after the start of your period, actually, not the end of your period. So day 1 to day 14. And then this textbook average cycle has a 14-day luteal phase. So 14 days and 14 days. Now, I feel like that information does a huge disservice to women because number one, it's an average. So actually not very many people have those numbers because averages, by definition, take, all sorts of different numbers from higher and lower and create an average. But those numbers also came from studies that were done a long, long time ago, and newer studies that are actually done from period tracking app data show that the average cycle is now longer. It's about 29 and a half days. So that 28-day cycle is kind of like this magical number, but you don't have to have a 28-day cycle to have a normal cycle. Anywhere from about 21 to about 35 days is actually considered normal, as long as it doesn't sway too much from cycle to cycle. And it does matter how long each phase is, because if the follicular phase is less than about 10 days, the follicles don't have enough time to fully develop and to mature and to have a high quality egg. But then if your luteal phase is too short, if it's not at least 11 days, then there's not really enough time for a fertilized egg to implant before progesterone drops and you get your period. So the length of the cycle it isn't the full story, I guess. It's the individual phases that matter more. So the answer to your question, I went on a tangent, which I do a lot, I'm sorry. The answer to your question is that, yes, ovulation can happen roughly 2 weeks after the start of your period, but it doesn't have to. It could be 11 days. It could be 20 days, and that is all normal.
So how do we know? Like if somebody's trying to conceive, how do you know?
Lovely question. So this is what I do. I help people chart their cycles. So cycle charting is quite different than period tracking. Period tracking, which is what a lot of period tracking apps do, is basically you input your period and it uses an algorithm to tell you when you're going to ovulate and then when you're going to get your period again. They're not really correct most of the time because they're using other people's data, and they're also using your past cycle data, and cycles are inherently not predictable. It does depend a little bit on what your intentions are there, though, because if you're only using it to track your period and you don't really, you're not charting your cycle to avoid pregnancy or to conceive, then it doesn't really matter. If you're regular and it's sort of right, it's okay. But period tracking apps don't have any secret information that you don't have. I think that's my biggest beef with them, is that people feel like the period tracking app said that I'm ovulating right now, or I'm supposed to get my period right now, but I don't have my period. Does that mean my body's broken? I was like, no, actually, it's just that the app is wrong because the algorithm sucks. Your body's fine. It's not the other way around. What I do is I teach people to cycle chart, which is the art of paying attention to the biomarkers of your own body every single day, and not relying on an algorithm. So the biomarkers that we use are cervical mucus. So cervical mucus is such a powerful tool because it reacts to both progesterone and estrogen pretty strongly, and you can tell what the patterns are. So you can it reflects the patterns of cervical mucus. If you track them every day, it reflects where you are in your cycle every day. So you can actually tell if estrogen is high, if progesterone is high, and whereabouts you are. So that's one way. And then another way is basal body temperature. Yeah, I love cervical mucus. I can talk about that all day.
Heather, sorry, Crisia, I'm just going to interject here.
Yeah,
Heather,
that's okay.
Do you remember, you said basal body temperature. Do you remember I bought one of those thermometers? Heather, do you remember that? And I was using
I had one
it.
too.
Yeah, we both got it to try not to get pregnant. That was our birth control.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Crisia, is that a little silly?
Well, I mean, it's not silly that you did that because I feel like it's in like social media that you can do that. But what I'm about to tell you will tell you why it's not a good idea. So basal body temperature reacts to progesterone. So when progesterone rises, your metabolic rate actually increases a little bit and your core temperature heats up by tiny bits. So you need a thermometer that goes to at least 2 decimal places. It needs to be more precise than a regular fever thermometer. Mm-hmm. But you can only tell that you've already ovulated because progesterone is already high, right? So that corpus luteum is already there. The egg has already come and gone. So it can't tell you when you're fertile. Being fertile and ovulating are actually not the same thing. So being fertile means that you have an environment that is friendly to sperm. So sperm can live in the cervix for 5-6 days before ovulation ever happens. And that's because of cervical mucus. Cervical mucus will actually take sperm. So sperm actually can't live for more than like 24 hours on its own. They don't have enough nourishment. But if the cervical mucus is there, it will take sperm into the cervix. It will lock it up in cervical crypts. It will feed it and store it. Yeah, it's really cool. Mm-hmm. And it can't survive without the cervical mucus. So if the cervical mucus is there, you're fertile. And that means that you can store sperm. And if you ovulate within the next 5 or 6 days, that sperm can then go on to fertilize the egg. So if the basal body temperature is only telling you when you've already ovulated, but it's not telling you when you're fertile or not. So that's why it's not an amazing idea to do that by itself.
So then if I'm understanding correctly, once you've ovulated, your body temperature would go up?
That's right. Yeah.
And then at that point, is it too late to try and conceive, or is it like, do it right that second?
On average, it's too late. The most common time to get that rise in temperature is a day after ovulation. But having said that, studies show that you can actually get that rise in temperature even up to like 5 days after ovulation and up to like 2 days even before ovulation during that luteinization process. So it's a little iffy. You can't tell exactly when you've ovulated based on basal body temperature, but the most likely time to get that rise is the day after ovulation. And because the egg only lives up to 24 hours, it's usually too late. I often recommend that people try up to the day that they see that rise because it still could be possible. If you're trying to avoid pregnancy, though, there are some really strict rules depending on which method you follow. So this is a whole other topic, but there are fertility awareness-based methods out there that have been studied for efficacy. They're like a specialized way of cycle charting, and you would learn them with accredited instructors. And for those methods, generally their rules line up with about 3 days of high temperatures because you want to be really sure that the egg is dead and gone. And you don't want to see that temperature drop again because sometimes there are some false shifts that happen. It has to be a sustained rise. So there are all sorts of details that we can go into.
Women's bodies are incredible.
Yes, I agree. Definitely agreed.
So when you were trying to conceive the first time or the second time that you realized I don't know much about my own body?
The first time, just when I came off birth control. So I was on birth control for, over 10 years. And when I came off it, I knew the word ovulation, but I didn't know anything about what it 100%.
Meant. Same. Yeah. I had no clue.
No, zero, none. And at that point, I think I got a little bit mad at myself and a little sad that I was like, wow, like I've gone so long. Like I was in my early 30s at this point. I was like, I've gone a really long time not understanding what my body does and not understanding what the birth control was doing in that process too. You know, I thought that the bleed on a birth control was the exact same as a period, and it's not at all. I started getting motivated to do more research, and I guess being a biologist made me even more motivated.
So I do have a question. Maybe I kind of have two different questions, and I don't know which one you want to touch on. But number one, I am interested in like our cervical mucus and how that like changes throughout the cycle. Is it like literally with each phase it's completely different? Because I mean it's just something that it happens to all of us, and I know so little about it, but I know it's there.
But the only cervical mucus I am privy to is like the egg white, and that is it. So that's a really good question, Heather, because I don't know the difference between any of it. Yeah, so
cervical mucus is so cool. It is, my opinion is that it's women's superpower. It does, like I already alluded to the fact that, you know, sperm would get nowhere without cervical mucus. But it also really can tell you what's happening in your body at any given time. So there are 4 main kinds of cervical mucus that have been discovered. I think there are probably more. There's not that much research happening in that area. But what happens is that the cervix has these cervical crypts, and which I actually find really cool too, just that term.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say the terminology on that.
Yeah.
Can
so
you
mysterious.
Explain that a bit further? Is it because I don't know, this is so wrong for some reason. I'm picturing like
a crypt keeper,
beehive, or something.
I mean, it kind of is like that. Yeah. So think of so it's the entrance to the uterus. It's like a U-shaped structure, and inside it are these like divots, like lots of them throughout the cervix, the height of the cervix. And at different heights, the crypts produce different kinds of cervical mucus. Sometimes there are mixtures. And what happens is that when estrogen starts to rise, the cervix responds to estrogen by producing estrogenic cervical mucus. And that kind of mucus is about 3 different kinds. And once progesterone comes into play in the luteal phase, the cervix starts producing gestogenic cervical mucus. So it's actually the same kind of mucus that produces the plug in pregnancy. It's a little less intense of a plug during your cycle, but you actually have a cervical plug every single cycle under the influence of progesterone.
And then when you start bleeding, that plug is removed? Is that
plug kind of is sort of removed, and then it kind of comes back a little bit, and then it's like fully removed when estrogen starts rising. Yeah. So there's a type of mucus called P mucus that first comes into play when estrogen starts rising, and that dissolves the rest of the plug, whatever's remaining there. And it allows the other kinds of mucus to start coming out, and the cervix starts opening and softening, and that's to allow sperm to go in. And you'll start, so at the beginning, like after your period, you'll start seeing kind of like gummy cervical mucus.
Like discharge? Would that be called discharge?
That's another good question. So vaginal discharge is the word for everything that's coming out of the vagina. And that could be, so the biggest part of vaginal discharge is cervical mucus, but it could also be like vaginal cell slough, like the vagina cleans itself. Oh. And that can come out. It can be arousal fluid. So arousal fluid comes from glands that are right at the bottom of the vagina. And it can also be like seminal fluid if you've had intercourse. So vaginal discharge is the name for all of those things. It can also be bacterial if you have an infection, but most of the time it's not. There's discharge almost, not for everybody, but for some people they have discharge every day of their cycle. And in the luteal phase, it would be mostly like vaginal cell slough that you might be seeing instead of cervical mucus. And during that high estrogen phase, in the follicular phase, you'd be seeing more cervical mucus. Does that answer your question? I feel like I go on so many tangents with cervical mucus.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, we're pulling you in many different directions here because we have 101 questions.
Well, I'm excited that you do.
And I love talking. I guess it kind of leads into, is there like any red flags to look out for with your discharge or anything during your cycle that if it is happening?
Yeah. So I'm not a medical provider. I will put that out there. But I do, if people say that it's like, it has a funky smell, if it's like cottage cheesy in texture, if it's like green or weird colors, like a yellow tinge, like a light yellow tinge is usually okay. It's usually a sign of progesterone. But those three things, and symptoms like pain, itchiness, then I would usually tell people to go see a medical provider. But a lot of discharge is totally normal.
So when you work with clients, if there are clients who are having a hard time conceiving, are they usually missing a piece of this puzzle that happens over the month?
Yeah, so there are people that have been trying for a really long time, and there's usually something more at play. Could be male factor infertility, could be endometriosis, or there could be plugged, like the egg is not able to come out to the uterus, or all sorts of medical issues that could be happening if you've been trying for a year and nothing's happening. But there are also a significant number of people that are missing their ovulation because they're trusting these apps. So that's when, so usually I'll work with somebody for at least one cycle and just see what's happening. If it looks really good on the chart, if we can say, okay, this is when ovulation's happening, you've been hitting it at the right time, the cervical response looks pretty good, like the cervical mucus patterns are decent, then I immediately tell them to go get a referral to a fertility clinic if they've been trying for a long time, because even if you're like within a few days and you're not hitting it exactly right, it's likely that by a year you'll have gotten pregnant. So there's a little bit of play there. I don't want to, wait too long before I tell people to go get a fertility clinic referral. But at the same time, there are so many studies out there that are showing that people just can't tell when they ovulate, and they think they know, but they're missing it. A lot of times, like even up to like 20 or 30% of people are completely missing their fertile windows. Wow. And with those kinds of people, it's really, it's so empowering, I think, to be able to like see when they're ovulating very clearly on the chart. And sometimes they'll get pregnant.
Say charting, sorry to interrupt you there. How are you charting? Like what are there, is it because I remember you mentioned the strips. Is that like the main thing is tracking your hormones on those strips, or what's how do you, this charting?
Yeah.
I'm interested.
Good question. So the LH strips are actually another biomarker. I got distracted. So cervical mucus, basal body temperature, and then urinary hormone home tests are another biomarker that you can use on a chart. Which are the strips? Which can be LH strips, but there's a lot of femtech out there. I don't know if you've heard of that term, but there is a lot of...
I haven't either.
Yeah, femtech. You should Google it. There's so much stuff out there, and a lot of like tech money going into it. Oh, cool. So there are a lot of pieces of tech nowadays that will be able, like you can actually test your FSH, your follicle stimulating hormone. You can test your progesterone. You can test your estrogen at home. So you can actually test all four of those hormones. But the LH strips, those ovulation tests, are have been around the longest, and they're the cheapest. And often you don't actually need them if you're doing cervical mucus and basal body temperature, but sometimes it's nice to have them to be able to see that quantitative result.
Right.
But going back to yeah, exactly. Going back to the question of what charting is. So charting is all of these biomarkers together on a chart that basically just says day one, what was your cervical mucus? What was your basal body temperature? What was your urinary hormone test if you want to do those? Day two, what was your basal body temperature? What was your cervical mucus? And then over time, you'll be able to see patterns. On my Instagram, I share a chart really, really often because I find that people give me feedback. They find it useful to see my own charts. So because I chart daily for my own health, I just like to see what's happening, especially because I think I'm going into perimenopause. So I'm finding it super fascinating to see what's happening to my cycles, which is another cool thing you can do with charting. You can see how your cycles change over time.
Crisia, I know that you work a lot on postpartum conception as well. Is there a difference between somebody who's trying to conceive the first time versus the second or third or fourth or whatnot?
Depending on when you're trying to conceive after giving birth and whether you're still breastfeeding, that could be a factor. I am really passionate about postpartum fertility. It doesn't have to be conceiving. It just understanding your cycle postpartum. I feel like it's such a mystery to people, like what's happening. So you can, think back of when I described what a cycle is. You can kind of think of birth as your period for a cycle chart. So you're emptying the contents of the uterus. You're starting a whole new cycle. So pregnancy, remember how I said that if you get pregnant, your corpus luteum stays active and progesterone stays up. You don't get a period. So, and at some point your placenta takes over that progesterone production. So you have really high progesterone in pregnancy. So you can think of, and you never get your period, right? So you can think of pregnancy as like a very extended luteal phase. When you give birth, you've now started a new cycle. And now you're going to be in a pretty extended, depending how much you breastfeed, you can be in a very extended follicular phase. So your body's going to try to ovulate, and you'll get these things called ovulation attempts. And eventually one of those will succeed and you'll go back into regular cycles. But it can get tricky. It can get tricky because you can get bleeds that are not periods. And they're more common in postpartum. It can happen anytime, but they're more common in postpartum. And we can get into why if people are interested, but that's a whole other topic too. I think it's funny, I had like a 2-hour workshop on just how to troubleshoot LH strips. So I think I can, these topics can get so detailed if you really want to know.
We'll have you back for round 2 and round 3.
Yeah. But did that answer your question? There are a bunch of things that can happen, but understanding what's happening postpartum, you can chart postpartum. You don't have to be bleeding regularly. You don't have to have an actual cycle to be able to chart. And it's really empowering to know what's happening. Now, if you're trying to conceive, you have to think about whether you're ovulating again. That's like the number one thing. Yeah.
And breastfeeding delays ovulation, is that correct? I don't just know because when I breastfed, it took quite a few months for me to, for my period to start back up again. And I don't know if that's just normal or if it's because I was breastfeeding.
Yes, it's very normal. So the hormone prolactin that's produced when you're breastfeeding suppresses ovulation. So, but it depends a lot on individual bodies. So some people, it's actually normal if you're co-sleeping and using your own breasts as pacifiers. And I think there's a term called like ecological breastfeeding. If you're doing those maybe a little more extreme things, then you can actually delay ovulation for up to 2 years, and that's normal. It's totally normal. People don't realize that, and they think that they're broken, but it's normal. But if you don't breastfeed at all, you can ovulate as early as 6 weeks postpartum, 8 weeks, 6 weeks, somewhere around there. So people who are breastfeeding but maybe use pacifiers or go longer than about 6 hours at night, or maybe start going longer than 4 hours during the day. There are all sorts of rules that have been developed over time in this research, because some people use breastfeeding as birth control, which we can also get into if you want. There are really specific rules.
Right, technically it's not, right?
It can be. There are just very specific rules that you have to follow that actually most people don't follow. For example, pacifiers, or it has to be you can't have bled at all after your first bleed. It has to be under 6 months. There are some really specific things. And so there's a lot of controversy about whether breastfeeding can be used as birth control. It can, under the right circumstances, and you need to learn with an instructor. You can't just half-ass it.
Right. So basically just don't.
I would say not unless you work with an instructor, which I can recommend. Yeah, I can recommend an instructor for. It's called the lactational amenorrhea method or LAM, and it is actually a fertility awareness based method, but it's a very specific method with very specific rules and criteria.
That's really cool. I had no idea.
Yeah, so yes, breastfeeding does delay ovulation, but it's the suckling too that talks to your brain and suppresses ovulation. And some people's bodies are more sensitive or less sensitive. So, some people actually need to fully wean to ovulate. And some people will ovulate, in the first 3 months, even though they're fully breastfeeding with no pacifiers or nothing. So it depends a lot, I guess.
So I have a question about postpartum. And this I'm asking because it's not just me this has happened to. So it's not just like asking for a friend.
Sure.
I've spoken to a few people and we're all kind of in the same boat. But my first periods after giving birth were like some of the worst ones I've ever had. And I'd say they've continued to be a lot like this is whatever. There's no TMI here. Giving birth, with using tampons, I was just like a regular or a super for a day. Post, I was going through supers like in under an hour, 2 hours. It's better now, but is that related to in any way, or is your body like trying to recover? Like I couldn't figure out what the heck was going on. I was terrified.
I think it is pretty normal for it to be a little heavier at the beginning. It should regulate within about 6 cycles. I'd say it's a red flag if you're going through like a super tampon in under an hour. I would recommend that if someone is to go in, although they might not always do anything.
They didn't. She just said if it continues to come back. And it did stop. It was only, like you said, it was probably the first few ones with both of my kids after. And it's a lot more back to normal what it was before. But I just found it interesting with both my kids, both times following. It was like something I had never experienced before.
Yeah, it can be common. I don't think it's super well understood, to be honest, like why it happens, because there's not much research into this stuff. But it is known that about 6 cycles is what you're looking at to get back to normal, whatever your normal is. And for some people that there are some changes that can stick around. But they're not all bad as long as it's within the range of normal. But I would definitely, if you're going past a few cycles of what you just described, that would not be normal.
Don't worry, I'm good, guys.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes, got to hear that, Heather.
You know what? I hear a lot of people come to me and say, like, I have my period for 3 weeks straight and it's super heavy and my doctor said it's normal. Like, maybe get a referral to an OB.
Yeah.
At that point.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So about 6 cycles, what you're looking at. That is also it's also something good to keep in mind if you're trying to conceive again, because the luteal phase can be pretty short in the first few cycles, which might not allow implantation to happen. So you're looking at 3 to 6 cycles before you might be able to get a healthy ovulation going. For some people, the first ovulation is healthy enough to get pregnant, but not for everybody, and it's just not. It's not a thing to panic about, I guess.
I have a question about birth control. I know a lot of OBs. For both my experiences, when I went back for my 6-week checkup, they're like, "And do you want an IUD?" So I eventually took her up on that offer when I was 9 months postpartum with my second, but like, is that bad for her body? I don't really get a period. Is this bad? And if somebody wants to, not me, I'm not talking about myself, but say if I wanted to get pregnant again, how long does it take my body to get back on track? But I guess I'm going to assume that you're going to say that's individual for everybody.
Yeah.
And that's where charting comes in?
Yeah, it's unfortunately it is pretty individual. I mean, birth control, hormonal birth control is known not to like permanently. It doesn't permanently reduce your fertility. That's pretty well known.
Do the
in
pills
the research.
do that?
Not permanently.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So when you're off them, you would work your way back to normal. Having said that, for some people it can take a little while to get back to normal. You might ovulate right away, but your cervical response might not be fully there. So you might not have great cervical mucus patterns for a while, for example. So it can take a little while. I've seen charts that take even 6 months plus when you're off an IUD to have like a really nice cervical mucus pattern.
Talk about needing patience. Holy cow.
That doesn't mean you can't get pregnant. So pregnancy doesn't only happen with perfect cycles. That's a point that I feel like isn't made enough. Like, you don't need to have a perfect cycle to get pregnant. Your body does want to get pregnant for the most part. But it can take a little while sometimes, and I feel like that's not commonly understood. People think that they stop their pill and they can get pregnant the next day, and then it's not quite as easy as that.
Right.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is just give your body time and have a little bit of patience.
Yeah. So if you wanted to conceive within about 6 months, I would recommend getting an IUD out and charting. So you can actually chart for birth control in postpartum as well. It's a little trickier, but there are certain methods that have postpartum protocols with efficacy studies. These methods are not well known to medical doctors. They just aren't really taught in medical school. But the efficacy studies are in medical journals. They're done by OBs. There's actually a group in the States of doctors, of OBs. I think they're all OBs. Maybe they're not all OBs, but their main goal is to bring fertility awareness-based methods into medical school to make doctors more aware that these things are around. Like, if you look at birth control charts in doctor's office, you'll usually see at the very bottom, fertility awareness method, not reliable, stay away. And it's usually, they quote the efficacy of the rhythm method. And the rhythm method was, the first ever fertility awareness-based method put out in like the 1930s. It was a big deal at the time because there was no other way for women to control their fertility. But it relied on a cycle being regular. And as I was saying earlier, the follicular phase is inherently adaptable. It can change. If you're stressed out, your ovulation can be delayed. So having a calendar method where you're counting days, that's what the rhythm method is. It's a type of calendar method, is not reliable because you can be regular until you're not. Yeah. And if you're regular for like 7 months and all of a sudden you're not in the next one because, I don't know, you're moving, your kid stressed you out, whatever has happened, it's just not worth it, right? Like, it's not worth it because 1 out of 8 months that you have a high chance of pregnancy when you're trying to avoid it is not worth it. But there are methods that aren't the rhythm method that are just not included in doctors' offices because they just don't know anything about them. But I teach a method that has pretty good efficacy for postpartum birth control.
Yeah, what I love what you do is for conception, but also for birth control. So this is really cool. Crisia, Can you tell everybody where they can find you on social media and any information you want people to have and maybe where you're located? I don't know if you do remote work, but give us all the deets.
Yeah, I do. I do remote work. My Instagram is at cycle.and.flow. So Cycle and Flow is my business. I do like 1 hour consults if you just want to chat about what your cycle is, if you want some education. But I also do monthly support if people are trying to conceive and they want to be texting me to send me cervical mucus pictures. My favorite.
More photos the better.
Yeah, totally. I have so many cervical mucus folders on my phone.
I love it.
Like, don't open that folder.
Yeah, I will show them to everybody. I have no shame. Mine, I mean, not other people's. And then I can also teach a specific. I'm accredited to teach a specific method when it comes to birth control. So I only teach that one method. But if you're trying to conceive, I usually do more of I teach a generic method depending on what it is that you have the capacity to do. If you don't want to take your temperature every morning, we can work around that. If you don't want to take LH tests, we can work around that. But when it comes to birth control, you have to follow the rules really strictly, as you can imagine. So it's a little bit different. Yeah.
I burnt out pretty quick for that basal body temperature, just like waking up and like laying still at like 7:15 every morning. I was like, I don't have this kind of commitment.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, I was a strip gal.
Yeah, and then the strips, yeah. Is there anything, Crisia, that you want to share that we didn't touch on?
Gosh, there's so much, because I can talk about fertility and the menstrual cycle for hours. But I guess I just want to say that the best thing you can do for yourself is start a body literacy journey. That's what I like to call it, because we are inherently just we're just not taught, and we're taught to also ignore. We're taught to ignore what our vaginal discharge is, and we're taught that it's a bad thing and that it's gross. And so we're actually almost taught to go the opposite way. Don't learn about your body. So it's just so empowering to start that journey, even if you start small, even if you just start noticing your vaginal discharge and think, wow, this is actually cool. It's not a bad thing, you know? Yeah.
I have one more follow-up question. You have boys. What are you going to teach them about the female body?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been really open. They've seen me putting a cup in. We've talked about the menstrual cycle. We've talked about cervical mucus. There was one time that I felt was a win for me. I'm not sure how other parents would feel, but Nico was 3. We were in a public bathroom. He came in with me. He peed, then I peed, and then he saw cervical mucus because I was wiping. And he was like, Mama, you have cervical mucus, and yelled it in the public bathroom. It's this is amazing. This is amazing.
And I love that he used the term cervical mucus. That's so good.
So I came out of the bathroom, and I was actually really disappointed to see that it was empty. It's I just want to start this conversation with whoever's in here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm just, my goal is to be as open as much as they want to learn, I guess. I would be open. If they start getting uncomfortable or embarrassed, of course, I'm not going to push them, but I would be pretty open as much as possible. Yeah.
And would you encourage other boy moms to be the same?
I mean, I would always encourage girl mom and boy moms to talk about this as much as possible, because it's just, it will be just so empowering to feel at home in your body throughout your life. I just think it's such a gift to give to our girls, and then our boys to be able to respect that and support their female peers. I think is just, I think it's just the goal for me.
Incredible. I love that.
Me too.
Okay, well, on that note, Crisia, thank you so much for the info. I feel like we need to have you
so
back.
informative.
Oh, yeah. We need to have you back.
I have a million follow-up questions.
Okay, well, you can just DM me and we can have a call anytime.
Love it.
Perfect. Yeah. Heather, why don't you take us home?
I will do my best. I was just in my head, I'm like, oh my gosh, what's our Instagram account?
What's our info?
It's been a long day. Well, if you guys want to follow us, you can follow us on Instagram and TikTok on Just Us Gals Podcast. We'd love to hear from you and all that jazz. Like us, review us, share us with your friends, and you can send us an email to chatwiththegals@gmail.com.
Absolutely nailed it. Perfect.
Yes, got it. And on that note, everyone have a fantastic week.